personality to clash, etc.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this event today. Just making sure you're in the right room. This is Reaching Out, Levelling Up, how conservatives can foster social cohesion. This is a Bright Blue event, very generously sponsored by the Together Coalition. Just to let you know more about Bright Blue, in case you don't know that much about us, we are the think tank for liberal conservatism. We have a number of different areas that Bright Blue works towards, which is energy and environment, social policy, economy and employment, and also housing is becoming kind of almost the fifth, but then we also do education as well. For those of you who might be tweeting along with us, we will be live tweeting, but if you want to tweet along with us as well, please do make sure to tag us, which is We Are Bright Blue, and also the Together Coalition, which you can do at Together Colit, which is great name. If you are watching online as well, please do also ask questions through the Slido link. We have a truly fantastic panel with us today. For those of you who have eyes, you might have realised this is quite a male-dominated panel today. Bright Blue does apologise for that. They did try their best, but some things don't just work out. But we have a truly amazing panel with us today. Starting to my left, we have Samuel Kasumu, who is the former Special Advisor to Number 10 for local communities and also Mayor candidate for London. We have Tim Montgomerie at the end, who is the founder of Conservative Home. To my right, we then have Director of More in Common UK, Luke Tryl. Moving down towards that way, we have David Goodhart, who is the author of The Road to Somewhere. And finally, on the far right, we have John Knight, who is the Chief Executive of the Together Coalition. Without further ado, I'll pass on to Samuel, but I will remind speakers very quickly, we have 5 minutes is your max time. I do kind of want to hear from you guys, that's why you're here to ask questions. So I will start to cut you off. Samuel, I'm watching you very closely.
Good evening, everyone. I suppose the question of how to foster social cohesion feels more current and pertinent following the Home Secretary's speech in Washington last week. I think we should first start by establishing a few key principles that I am sure we would all mostly agree on. Firstly, Britain is one of the best places in the world to live regardless of your background and despite the disparities that still stubbornly persist. Secondly, wanting your country to be better does not automatically mean you do not care about it or do not recognise the progress that has already been made. Thirdly, often the most striking disparities has geography as a key contributing factor, arguably more so than protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And finally, social cohesion means different things to different people from different places for different reasons. So to frame the conversation of social cohesion in the context of levelling up is peculiar to me, as when I have visited northern towns, their sense of community has often struck me as stronger than folks in the south. Yes, there are parts of the country that are suffering from young people leaving to live in major cities in pursuit of higher education, jobs and opportunities. But I would argue that the social fabric and sense of belonging is still as strong in the areas we are speaking about today as anywhere else. I was told that this sense of togetherness can often be linked to a collective desire to overcome struggles more than a sign of communities thriving. Just like geography often, but not always, plays a more significant role than protected characteristics when determining an individual's outcomes, I do not believe that social cohesion in and of itself, or even social capital, is more significant than what we know Northern members of Parliament, Metro mayors and citizens have been promised for many years: structural change and radical investment. There needs to be better transport, dare I say, including the current HS2 plans delivered in full, which I don't think Tim would agree with me on, but we'll find out a little later. There needs to be more incentives for large employers to invest in post-industrial areas, and so it's good to see that Liz Truss's idea of investment zones seem to still be on the agenda. This year I had the privilege of visiting Ben Houchen in Tees Valley and the transformative work being done that will produce clean energy and thousands of jobs. Large-scale structural change is what levelling up has to mean. It is the priority, and anything else is merely passing time. Having said that, one of my favourite books is David Goodhart's Road to Somewhere. I wrote that book. I'm not lying. And he knows. where he so eloquently simplifies why so many people feel a sense of frustration about social cohesion. They feel that many new arrivals choose not to assimilate into British culture. They're more transient and less attached to a place. And after I left Downing Street in 2021, I spent 2 years trying to explore this subject further, as I felt like whilst there was a lot of analysis of what people could see, what was unseen was probably the missing piece in public discourse. If you go to any country in the world, you will find that new arrivals often seek out that which is familiar. That is why we have Chinatowns all over the world and why we have expat communities. I believe that the key to the survival of the human species over time has been because we innately seek to associate with that which is familiar. Whether you are speaking about an old boys network or any other example, we always seek to find things that allow us to have that sense of familiarity. So what can be done to build the social fabric that has been lost in many parts of the country? Well, firstly, inspirational leadership is required, something that I believe we sadly lack in politics today. At least under David Cameron, there was some consideration for how communities could be brought together, be it through the National Citizen Service for young people and wider big society project. Now, we have politicians weaponizing culture wars because they lack the intellectual range to fix the big issues of the day. The government has no plan for trying to bring people together. Our politicians have failed. In Downing Street, I was one of very few special advisors that even seemed to care. So I think the issue of improving social cohesion is a universal challenge for this country. Whilst addressing it in the context of levelling up poses interesting questions, we must remember that any brain drain or other social-oriented challenges is in so-called left-behind towns are first and foremost because of a lack of investment in those areas over an extended period of time. That is what must be addressed, and the rest will hopefully follow.
4 seconds over the 5 minutes. pretty. I'll give you that, Sam. That was pretty impressive. Pretty well rehearsed. Tim, if you'd like to start.
It's a massive topic, and I'm really grateful to be invited here to talk about it. But David Goodhart and I've just been to another meeting with the Centre for Social Justice, and I'm just going to rehearse something I talked a bit about there. Just one idea, and it's my obsession, but I think it's if I gave you 10 points, you might probably only remember one anyway, so I'll only give you one to take away. And that's I don't know whether you heard of the housing theory of everything, but that's what I'm basically signed up to, is that when I established Conservative Home, the name Home wasn't just because it was where you go on the internet to find out about conservatism. Home, for me, is the most resonant Conservative idea. If I could choose a symbol for the Conservative Party, it would be a house, it would be a home. It's about ownership, it's about identity, it's about locality, it's about security, it's about property, it's about having a stake in community. It was the best thing Margaret Thatcher did, was to sell the council homes to the people who lived in them. It gave them opportunity, it gave them security, it gave them wealth. The worst thing she did wasn't to replace that stock. You look at the house building since the post-war period. Private sector building actually, pretty consistent. The private sector has done its job. It's the state that stopped building homes. And what I would do, and at the meeting I was at with David, we had Andy Burnham and Ian Duncan Smith on the panel. Andy Burnham talked a lot about, as just I have just done, about house building. Ian Duncan Smith talked a lot about family formation. And it's a real shame, really, because these two policies could come together and really be a coherent cross-party agenda for really addressing social cohesion. If we were building the homes that people needed to give them security, the stake and the stability that they need, and somehow that was linked to so that you got a council home when proximity to the extended family was a key allocation criteria, we could really begin to connect people again. It's extraordinary. In my own family circumstance, my parents moved from Salisbury to Weybridge when my sister gave my parents the grandchild that I didn't. But all of our family was involved in helping that move. Those of you know the property prices from comparing Salisbury to Weybridge. They had to downsize massively, and they still couldn't afford it, but we all took part. I've never known my parents happier than being grandparents. And they have made Charlie's life infinitely richer than if he hadn't had his grandparents in his life. We were able to do that because we were a middle-class family with the wealth to support my parents moving. The state has not been interested in that relationship in any way. Because if my mum and dad had set up a formalised childcare system, they probably would have got some state money. But actually, because they provided it through the family, they were indifferent to it. But Charlie's enriched it. Whenever he's naughty at school, the first thing he says, please don't tell Granny. Please don't tell Granny. And you know, the benefits that he has had from having grandparents in his life, I think in terms of social cohesion, having strong families at the heart of any community matters more than anything else. I would build council houses, because at the moment the state's massively involved in the housing market. We're just involved by subsidising private landlords and throwing money away rather than investing. Build quality homes, mixed tenure in communities, so with private sector as well. Use private sector builders, but perhaps financed by the state, and then use that in a form of changing home ownership. So you have sort of like a local hold, as something they've experimented with or thought about experimenting with in Cornwall. So that actually communities can own homes that you build, so they're not just bought from people outside of the community. And I think then we might really have the core of a socially cohesive policy, which right and left could support. And women in a world beset by short-termism, I think it's a long-term policy for good too.
Amazing, thank you so much, Tom. Luke, if you'd like to go when you're ready.
Great, and thank you for having me to contribute. As Tim said, big question, and I was thinking about what I was going to say on the train up and looking for some inspiration, and in fact that inspiration came in the form of the roof of the train starting to leak and water pour through onto everyone who was sitting in my carriage, and as well as making me think, wouldn't it be nice if we had a new train service which went all the way to Manchester? It made me think. It made me think. Actually, I think this is indicative of so many of the problems which are facing the public realm and why we failed so much when it comes to fostering social cohesion. Because what actually happened on the train was it would leak. And then every half hour, a man would come out of a little room with some sticky tape and would patch it back up again. And then for half an hour, we'd be fine. And then it would start leaking again. And then he would come back and tape it up. And then it would start leaking again. And I think we've taken this patch and mend approach to our communities for far too long. And until we start thinking about long-term solutions, actually, you know, we can talk about social cohesion. We can talk a good game about bringing people together, but we really need to be thinking about much deeper solutions. It's why, actually, I was so pleased today to see the announcement of that new Towns Fund. I think that's really important, and moving away from that, I think Andy Street called it that kind of like Hunger Games culture of local authorities and towns bidding against each other, giving people a long-term settlement and giving them the power to think about how they improve their communities. I think also we foster social cohesion by giving more power away and letting communities determine their own future. It's gone, I think, a bit lost in the sort of, I think you might politely call it chaos of the past couple of years. But actually, devolution is one of the real success stories of this government. You know, and as of, I think it's next year, we'll have a new mayor in the East Midlands, in York and North Yorkshire, Norfolk and Suffolk will have combined authorities. And why these things are so important, you see it with Andy Burnham, you see what he's done with the Bee Network. Actually, it's much easier to build local pride when you're driving it from that locality rather than driving it from Westminster. So I think if we're going to foster social cohesion, we really have to double down on that levelling up agenda, and there's lots more to do. Nothing, and I genuinely mean nothing, and we see this all the time in the focus groups that we do, gets in the way of social cohesion more than crime and antisocial behaviour. Because of course, when people feel unsafe, they withdraw from the public realm and they put up bigger walls. And I think across government there needs to be more thinking about tackling that. It's sometimes called low-level crime, and I actually hate that phrase, because actually getting burgled, getting something vandalised isn't low-level. It really affects your everyday. There needs to be much more thinking. I really hope the government brings forward more of the measures in its antisocial behaviour action plan to really make a difference there as well. And of course, as Sam was hinting at, there's also a cultural dimension to this. How we handle, how our leaders, how the Conservative Party handles and helps guide the country through what have become known as culture wars really matters. I don't think that is done by leading a briefing on what is a very important issue. We need to have a think about how we deal with asylum, how we have a refugee policy which commands public confidence. But I don't think you get there by leading it with a briefing to the newspapers about gay people faking being gay in order to claim asylum here. I think that is dog whistle. I think it's the opposite of trying to foster social cohesion. And I think our leaders have a really important role to play in helping to steward those debates. That doesn't mean embracing social liberalism at every turn. Actually, I think our leaders have a job to do very often in pushing back against some of the excesses of those who want to take us too far, too fast. But it also means being very careful about the language that you use in these debates and really trying to bring people with you. And then finally, because I know that I'm running out of time, don't neglect education. I came into the Department for Education just after the Trojan horse scandal had taken place. And after that period, we did a lot of thinking. It wasn't all right, but we did a lot of thinking about how you use education as a force to bring people together. Things like fundamental British values, clamping down on unregistered schools where young people were being taught values that were entirely antithetical to the British way of life. So I think there needs to be more there. And it's even more urgent post-lockdown when we know that so many kids just haven't returned to school. If those kids aren't being socialised and introduced to others and introduced to British values, then we're never going to build that social cohesion we want. So that was a quick tour around what we do, but happy to take any questions as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Luke. David, I will pass on to you.
Okay. Well, Sam very kindly mentioned my book, so I should really mention his. That I think he failed to mention, The Power of the Outsider, which I admit I haven't yet read, but I'm hoping to receive a copy from him. Well, like Sam and Luke, I assumed that we would kind of be bouncing off the infamous Suella Braverman speech that was at least partly about multiculturalism, and I do think that actually she did raise some perfectly legitimate issues, and I think there are still issues around not just the integration between the ethnic majority and ethnic minorities, but that broader issue that I guess falls under the rather cloudy phrase social cohesion. Brendan Cox of the Together Coalition wrote a rather good little paper for us at Policy Exchange a few months ago, a paper that nobody seemed to notice at the time, called Whatever Happened to Integration. And I mean, Brendan made the point that there is no lobby for integration in British politics. I mean, for things to be picked up and run with in the political arena, it really does help to have a lobby. And both parties, for different reasons, have good reason not to talk too much about, certainly when we're talking about majority-minority ethnic integration. You know, the Tory party, at least historically, have been terrified of talking about race more or less since Enoch Powell. The Labour Party, you know, have big ethnic minority lobbies inside it, many of whom are not actually particular, for whom integration is not at the top of their list of concerns, I think it's fair to say. But we do still have a lot of segregation in a lot of our cities, London, obviously, Slough, Birmingham, Leicester, Bradford, Blackburn, Manchester. Obviously, people have focused quite a lot on Leicester in recent months, partly because of the disruption there. Although it was kind of and Leicester often held up as a sort of model of multiculturalism. I mean, I know Leicester a bit. It is not a particularly well integrated town. There are the white working class estates, there's the Hindu area, there's the Muslim area. I mean, it's a kind of laissez-faire multiculturalist model, not an integrated model. I mean, it's worked pretty well if you have your bar quite low. Again, thanks to Enoch Powell, because the Thames is not foaming with blood, we sort of think, well, because there's not actual violence between groups, that things must be kind of okay. As different minority communities have been here for longer periods, some of them have done well and moved into the more affluent suburbs. You do see you've seen a gradual dispersal in the neighbourhoods that people live in. But look at schools. Our schools are still fantastically segregated. I think something like 40% of ethnic minority pupils go to schools where the pupil population is less than 25% white British. And you can sort of say, well, does that really matter? I think there's a kind of broader issue of us evolving into a kind of red state, blue state Britain. That we have these big multi-ethnic cities where, at least on the surface, there's a lot of diversity, if not a huge amount of integration, and then we have much whiter small town and rural Britain, which kind of live by somewhat different lights, and I think that in a way is the sort of the challenge for social cohesion over the longer term, is to make sure that the gap between metropolitan big city Britain and the rest of Britain, and I think there are things that we can do about it. I think the reason that things have developed in the way they have, as I say, is partly because of our original approach to the treatment of incomers, which was very much clouded by a sort of colonial mentality. It was assumed that people would all want to live in a certain area, and of course, as Sam says, I mean, homophily, the desire for familiarity is a very powerful force. I think racism is not a huge factor in this any longer. I mean, what is it, sort of 3-4% of the population think you have to be white to be truly British. But I think that combination of wanting familiarity and the original sort of foundations of... I think there are things that can be done about it. It's very hard in liberal society to promote integration. But I do think, local authorities at the moment have a duty to promote social cohesion. No one really knows what that means. But actually it would be much more specific and potentially more useful to promote mixing between different groups. And why local authorities should be invited to publish statistics on neighbourhood mixing, on school mixing every year or every 2 years or every 5 years or something. So we could actually see, and nobody would want to be the most segregated local authority in Britain.
Just let you know about time.
Oh, okay. I'll stop there then.
Sorry, everyone. John, if you like to finish off speeches.
Yeah, of course, thank you. And thank you all for coming this evening. We're very proud to be sponsoring this panel, although I share the chair's view that we are a bit of a shame to be all male. I'm the token northerner on this panel, and as a northerner, I find the term levelling up to suggest that the north needs to somehow improve to be the same as the south, morally repugnant on every level. That being said, David suggested that social cohesion, no one knows what that really is. Well, actually, the Levelling Up white paper did a great job of defining social cohesion and social capital as part of the agenda. And it talked about it in many terms, but it talked about it in terms of trust. It talked about it in terms of trust that people have in their neighbours, trust that people have in their civic institutions. It talked about active citizenship, people participating in volunteering, people participating in local democracy. And it talked about relationships. It talked about building cohesive relationships. It talked about close friendships. It talked about having friendships from different backgrounds, and it recognised the health benefits of that. And actually, where we saw a lot of those things at their strongest in recent history was during the pandemic. And as contradictory as that might sound, particularly on the connection front, that was the thing we all yearned for when we were locked in our houses. trust was never higher than during the pandemic in one another and in civic institutions. And that sense of civic duty and that sense of volunteering, well, I was involved in St John Ambulance's vaccination rollout. We saw millions of people, the highest number of volunteers stepping forward since the 2012 Olympics at that point, to do something about the pandemic's issues on society. And I think that comes from that sense of shared identity. We really were all in it together for a little minute there. And what's happened since the pandemic? Well, I think Samuel summed it up really nicely. We've gone back to politics as usual. We've gone back to using division as a political tool rather than thinking about social cohesion. And for me, what is going to be the legacy of levelling up? Where are we going to see levelling up go? It's not writ large in the banners here today as one of the 5 promises. It doesn't seem to be very strong in the Labour Party agenda either. But actually, I think, while there's been huge successes on the levelling up agenda, transport's been mentioned. I won't mention HS2 because coming from the northeast, I'm probably unique in not having strong opinions on that. But I think for 0.001% of what you spend on an HS2, you can really still drive as a Conservative Party and as a party of government some change in this area in however long there's left for this levelling up agenda. You mentioned measures, you mentioned statistics. There's great work out there by our colleagues at the Belong Network, by the King's College, by British Future, among others, to understand what this stuff looks like at a local level. And actually, if we formed a unit that measured that understood that published those statistics, I agree with you, David, I think we would see a lot of difference. And I think we would see that some of those southern areas, Middle England, home counties, etc., have this stuff in spades, and we can learn from that and we can share that out there. I also think we should be pointing to some of the successes of government. I think immigration is a tough and thorny issue. I don't think the comments from the Home Secretary in recent weeks have been supportive on that agenda at all. I would wholly agree with the view that they are divisive. But actually, this government has brought in refugees from the Ukraine, it's brought in refugees from Hong Kong. And indeed, if we are interested in social mobility, actually the number one people arriving in new areas, in towns and cities, come from elsewhere in the UK. But we know from studies that first year of living in a new place, and it's been mentioned on the panel already, is tough. It's when you're the most socially isolated, it's when you need the most connections. And I think actually leaning into that, supporting local governments to look at who is moving into their areas, how they can be supported, and how we can provide more welcoming communities for people is a great way of fostering and developing social cohesion accordingly. And I think if we thought about those issues more, if the government made it a higher priority for themselves, you would level out that levelling up agenda and have a legacy that wasn't about failed/continued infrastructure projects, and actually about one that really does foster social cohesion and social mobility.
Thank you very much, John. As my privilege of being chair, I always get to ask the first question. I've actually got 2. I'm going to try and take advantage of the fact that we have quite a wide-ranging ideology of conservatives on the panel. So I'm going to ask one that's maybe a little sensitive. We've been talking about the importance of giving people, local communities, power, control, giving it to the councils. Obviously, we've seen this week 20 mile per hour cause a bit of a problem, and potentially councils being taking away their powers. How do we feel about that? And then maybe a bit of a nicer question is sport is something that we can all kind of come together with. Have we utilised that enough to this point? I don't know who wants to go first. Perhaps maybe Tim, should I start with you?
Thank you. So the question on 20 miles per hour is specific on 20 miles per hour about
whether the government's taking local councils' power seriously, or are they reneging on it?
Yeah, I find the whole. I suppose I'd be seen on the right of the party if that's what you were referring to earlier about ideological mix. I have no problem, for example, with Suella Braverman's speech. And actually, it's constantly talked about it being divisive, but just to respond a little bit to John, you look at the opinion polling in the Times, Sunday Times today. The only thing people that seem to be divided are sort of the commentary who've honestly reacted to the speech and the rest of the population. The rest of the population like almost everything she said. It's interesting. But anyway, where I think, answering the question finally, is I think the gimmicky nature of this intervention by the Prime Minister in the last day or so slamming the brakes on the war on motorists. Oh, for goodness sake, you know, I think public can see right through that sort of stuff, and they don't like it. I don't think it works. And I don't drive, so I'm not got a particularly. Perhaps you wouldn't want me to drive at 5 miles an hour, let alone 20 miles an hour. But I actually think that localism should be something Conservatives really believe in. We should be allowing local authorities to have a broad mix of experimentation in a whole range of areas. And I don't think the quality, sorry to all the councillors in the room who are all brilliant, but the overall quality, I think, of a lot of our people in local government isn't very good. And why should it be very good if we've got no powers? You know, we don't trust local government properly. And so we should be giving more powers to people in local government, not taking them away. I think that's probably controversial enough. So I'll stop.
Can I come back as a local councillor?
As a local councillor, do you have some thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I haven't listened to or read Suella's speech, which is very convenient today. But I think I'm going on the radio to talk about it tomorrow, so I'm going to read it tonight at some point. Assuming I don't have too much wine. But in terms of localism, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know not everybody loves 20-mile-per-hour roads or LTNs or whatever we want to call them, but fundamentally I think that should be a decision made locally. And if the local people don't want it, then they can vote vote whoever is bringing it in out. I don't think that it should be weaponised by Rishi Sunak, and I don't think that the general public are going to be bought by these very strange policy announcements. So yeah, localism is very important to me. Having said that, I'm going to contradict myself because I think in terms of housing, which you spoke about earlier, Tim, I think localism has failed when it comes to how we make sure we build the homes that we need for future generations. So, you know, there's always some nuance in there, but ultimately localism is important. On your point around sport, you know, I think sport can bring people together. I have an 8-year-old son, and he's playing rugby since he was 2 years old and until he was 7, and it was amazing. It was amazing. Is an amazing way for people from different backgrounds to get to know each other and to mix, not just the kids but also the parents. And now he's playing football. He's not a Liverpool fan, even though I am, so it's something I'm still grappling with. But again, a totally different cohort of individuals and communities and people from different backgrounds. So I am a Liverpool fan too.
Yeah, I'm not sitting with you anymore.
But I think sport, and I used to do a lot of work for Sport England around this subject. But I think that sport is just a very easy way out for people. I think that actually what we need to have is better structure and intentionality around how we bring people together. And as I said, you know, when David Cameron, Steve Hilton and co arrived in 2010, this was part of their big agenda. It is the idea of bringing people together now is not on the agenda at all. And the challenge for this current administration is because of all the battles they're going to have to fight, some people call them wedge issues, in order for them to try and you know, have a respectful result next year, it's going to be very difficult to do that and to get folks to trust them enough, as John mentioned, to try to bring people together. I just can't see how in the next 12, 18 months there is any public effective political discussion around bringing people together. I just can't see it, which is very depressing, but I think that's just where we're at.
I love that. We're talking about how sport can bring us together, and you're a Liverpool fan. I'm not sitting with you.
Oh, we were robbed yesterday.
So I'll start, unless anyone wants to comment, I'm going to take some questions from the audience. I'll take probably about 3. I don't know if there's a mic coming around. I don't think there is. So, there is a mic coming around, so please wait for that. We'll start with one here. It's for the people online. So we'll start with the first one.
Hello, my name's Seb. I'm Chief Executive of Access, the Foundation for Social Investment, and Samuel's sort of hinted a couple of times at the big society agenda, if we can all remember that. And I find it really interesting that we've had a conversation about social cohesion without really talking about civil society, charities, social enterprises, the organisations in our communities that are doing a pioneering job of bringing people together and creating the space in which communities come together, but also delivering the public services of need. And we could talk about housing in that context as well, where some great stuff's happening. Why has this government kind of completely lost its narrative around what we used to call the third sector, civil society sector. It just doesn't appear in any of the debates about public services or about this kind of agenda. And what can we do to put it back where it belongs on centre stage?
Can we get your name and where you're from as well?
Seb Ellsworth from Access, the Foundation for Social Investment.
Perfect. I'll take two more as well. So, yeah, we'll start here then.
I was wondering, is there any support for us doing a Macron? I don't know if that would help with community cohesion or not. Getting clothes out, Muslim clothes out of school, Muslim clothes for girls out of schools on feminist grounds.
Interesting. Tough question, I'm sure. We'll do one more. Should we get the woman at the back, if that's okay?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Sarah Atkinson from the Social Mobility Foundation. We work with young people, and young people tend to be the most cohesive. They're the most supportive of each other, of lifting each other. But we're starting to see some emergence in polling of that starting to end. And I wonder what the panel think of what the narrative is for young people from this government, from any political parties, where the social cohesion narrative is for young people to keep cohesion and keep rising together and aspiring.
Sorry, can I get name and where you're from? Sorry.
Yeah, Sarah Atkinson, the Social Mobility Foundation.
Thank you. So yeah, we've got one question on third sector being lost, one on the question of Macron, which I love, and then young people and social cohesion. Does anyone want to start?
I can certainly come in on the big society question, and it's remiss of me not to say that the Together Coalition is built not just of political think tanks, but of civil society organisations, volunteering organisations. Sarah from the NCVO is at the back of the room. They did an incredible campaign with us called the Big Help Out around the coronation to drive volunteering this year. I think, what I should have also said is that the Conservatives and no government can drive social cohesion on their own. It is an issue that should be driven by all parts of society, by charities working with young people, by what we call third sector organisations. I think the reason why we don't talk about that is because the big society has become toxic, because it became linked so closely to the cuts to the local civic sector and to public sector that it became synonymous with the kind of austerity agenda. It became synonymous with all the pain that visited upon, particularly left behind communities. And I think we shy away from it. In fact, I know I shy away from that language when actually and I'm safe, probably the fewest safe room that I could be in to say this. I don't think it was a bad idea. I think it was a good initiative. I think it had the right method at its heart because it did recognise that there is more to how you build a society than just government intervention.
Amazing. Go David, please.
So, I really just wanted to chip in and support John's optimism that actually we've had two huge acts of volunteering in British society in the last couple of years, partly sponsored by the state, by the government. We had the pandemic. We had a lot of spontaneous kind of WhatsApp type social cohesion, for want of a better phrase, cropping up everywhere. I'm sure most of us in this room would have been involved in looking after old people in their neighbourhoods or whatever. We also had massive state-organised volunteering. Indeed, I was part of it. Probably a lot of people in the room were. We've also seen, the extraordinary Ukraine. With 120,000 British people have opened their houses and housed people from about 180,000 people from Ukraine in the last year and a half, and that's really rather extraordinary. And I think we could, and I think at some point in the future, when we kind of develop the safe and legal routes, sponsorship is going to be an absolute, family and community sponsorship will be an absolutely crucial part of that. I think the really disappointing thing, as others have indicated, is the way that levelling up, which is again something that could and still could bring together communities. And indeed, the white paper I thought was a pretty excellent piece of work and talked indeed, unlike lots of traditional regional policies, just about throwing money at poorer areas. This was about pride in place. It was about trying to create clusters of dynamism in different areas. But unfortunately, it does seem to have dropped off the agenda. Even when it was on the agenda, it was a bit like net zero. Everybody agreed in the in the goal, but there was such a big gap between the kind of goal and the means to get there. I mean, a lot of the points in the white paper, don't come to their end point until 2030. So I mean, there is still another, whatever it is, 7.5 years. But it's not. Those 12 indicators are not looking very good at the moment.
I'll have a go with two of them, if that's okay. I mean, just to build on what John and David have said, we put out some research on Friday with UCL Policy Lab on the theme of respect. And what was really interesting about that was one of the key ways that the public said you could demonstrate respect was by empowering local communities to take more ownership of their future. And when you asked them what they meant, who is part of your community, civil society was at the heart of that. It was really interesting. And what it wasn't was that big society piece, precisely because John said, because you talk about big society and the way it was framed, and it was about the state pulling away. Whereas actually, when you spoke to people, when we spoke to people in our focus groups on this, we asked them, what they wanted was collaboration. They wanted to recognise there are bits the council's going to do well, there are bits that civil society can do well. Actually, let's have a conversation of equals about who does what. And I think that's the way to get something like the big society back on track. I want to come to the point about going Macron, because as I mentioned when I opened, this was a lot of what I had to grapple with at the Department for Education and Ofsted. And I think there is no doubt that we need to be more robust, and the government needs to be more robust in defending school leaders in particular when they are facing pressure from particularly fundamentalist or very conservative religious groups. In fact, we saw that in Birmingham, where there were groups who were very aggressive in protesting about the government's new SRE policy, and unfortunately I have to say the Department for Education at the time basically vacated the field. They left it to the schools to defend themselves. We had occasions at Ofsted where schools, individuals, primary schools, decided to ban the wearing of the hijab, and again the government didn't step in to defend those head teachers. And I think it is really incumbent, and it's not just one religion, it is ultra-orthodox communities across the country. If we're serious about social cohesion, the government has to step in to defend schools as places where people can get that broad understanding of British values and British society.
Samuel or Tim, do you want to?
No,
All good. We might take a couple more questions if we've got a bit more time. Yeah, we've got plenty of time actually. Should we start down here? I feel you've been holding your hand up for quite a while. We'll take 3 more questions.
Get the nudge, man.
Thank you. My name's Jonathan. I represent myself. I am just a member from Kettering.
As you know.
I live in one of the left behind areas, one of the wards, and I'm also governor of one of the schools that covers the most deprived area of the ward. And I wanted to ask a question that relates to your question about sport, if I may, which is that I was at our open evening the other day, and I asked the head of PE, can you show me some of the trophies we've won recently? We had a whole ward of trophies, and the PE said, define recently. And he then explained to me, and I sort of already knew this having background in sport myself, that since the pandemic there's been a massive collapse in volunteers for youth sport. A lot of people just sort of, after the pandemic, thought, you know what, I can't be bothered, I'm not going to come back. And what this has an effect on is that competitive youth sport, in particular at the school level, has absolutely collapsed. And I feel like this is something that the government should be doing at a central level to try and encourage. If we were to take an American approach, it's a very common phrase, we're going to go for state. You have very strong structured leagues that allow schools to compete and try and reach to sort of a state championship. The UK has always adopted the very British approach of the plucky amateur organising it. And unfortunately, I feel like this might be one of those scenarios where that's probably not the appropriate thing. So what I'd like to ask the panel is, what do you think about the idea of adopting a more national approach to organising school competitive sport? Something that should be sponsored at a national level, organised from the top down, and then that would give a great way to have community interaction between different areas of the country and a structure, something that we don't really have in this country in terms of school, what we call varsity sport, if you'll forgive the Americanism. So that's my question. What do the panel think of that as an idea and a concept?
As someone who used to coach football, I feel very much I've been called out with that question. Should we go here next, Misha?
Hi, Claude Hendrickson from the Where Right Here group. A couple of things for me on that I'd like to push. You talked about housing, and sometimes we talk about communities like the people in communities are not quite knowledgeable and haven't learned a lot. We keep talking about them like, you know, they need this help. They're really quite efficient and can deliver. You talk about cohesion around housing. There's the community-led housing sector where they do co-housing projects, which creates community. A lot of the builders that are building houses are just building units. They're not building homes. They're building units, whereas the community-led housing sector gives you an opportunity to create cohesion. So I just wanted to know your views on supporting community-led housing as being a vehicle of looking at some of the housing issues. On young people, the point you made, the youth delivery mechanism has been devastated for over 10 years. And then we wonder why there's antisocial behavior from young people when there's no services being delivered to them. You know, there's no engagement, you know, after maybe 8, 9 years old. So, you know, so it's a bit strange, you know. And again, cohesiveness is about, to the point on this side, cohesiveness is about being willing to learn about other people. So, for example, take what, I'm of that generation of Windrush children that was born here, so that first generation. And Black History Month, which has now been accepted in modern society, is teaching about culture, giving other communities a chance to learn. And that's what needs to happen. We need to learn, you know, we have Diwali and we have all these, slowly but surely, you know, one of the greatest things, I'll leave it on this point, one of the greatest things I had to learn being an African Caribbean person born in England was the difference between Welsh people, Irish people, Scottish people, and English people. And there is a difference, but I had to learn that, but do the British and that learn about the other cultures. So it's about how do we push that, how do we get more Black History Month sharing of information that creates cohesion, because ignorance drives racism.
Thank you. Take one more question. Do you want to go to your right here?
My name's Sue Kay and I'm from Westminster. It's interesting you were talking about the big organised volunteering events. You were talking about the Olympics and the COVID, particularly the vaccination campaign, where I know a lot of volunteers, but also helping neighbours. There doesn't seem to be a huge legacy from either. Certainly the Olympics campaign, the legacy was very disappointing, that people did not then translate the volunteering into major sporting activity. And with the COVID thing, I'm not sure whether you've got the figures for the analysis yet of whether people who volunteered for that actually went on to volunteer for other things. And I think you're looking at the telescope, through the telescope, the wrong way. I think real cohesion and really effective groups are from the grassroots upwards. It's a group of people who get together with a common aim. It may be a coffee morning, like I've organised, where we've got 15 people from 10 different nationalities, and they come in and out as they want to, but they get together because we like each other's company. Or it may be sport, it could be anything. And I'm not sure how much the government, any government, can do to actually make that happen. Yes, there's some support, like maybe a little bit of money or a place to hold an event, but these things only work and only continue if they come from the grassroots and rely on some common interest across cultural groups, across racial groups.
Sam, do you want to start?
I just heard somebody. Was somebody going to say something?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Sam, please go first.
Go.
Okay. No, really interesting point. So, on what Claude was saying around social cohesion, I completely agree. It's people often forget that it's two-way. They often say, well, these people have arrived here. They need to, integrate themselves, learn, etc. But actually, we had things like white flight in major cities where people have moved into maybe more suburban areas, and so as a result, that integration didn't quite happen or sustain itself. but it's absolutely two-way. You have to be able to also understand the other, and not just say that they need to understand you. And the interesting thing is, to quote Luke's organisation, the name of Luke's organisation, we often find that when you go in, you meet people that are from different cultures or different age groups, different socioeconomic backgrounds, you find that we all have more in common. And so I think the breaking down of those barriers are fundamental to building a cohesive society. We also need to learn how to disagree more respectfully. Again, I'm for my sins, I'm a conservative, so I don't believe that the state has the answer to every social problem, but I do think that very often politicians and leaders set the tone. And so if politicians don't know how to be respectful about how they agree or disagree with certain policy positions, then they are setting a tone, and the media then will drive that, and then all of a sudden you have more division than you probably need. On the question of immigration, for example, I think the vast majority of the country are probably on the same page as Suella, as Tim has alluded to. But there are ways that you can articulate these positions that carry more people along and do not isolate certain groups. On the Olympic legacy, so when I was earlier in the year, when I was crazy enough to think I could be the London mayoral candidate, one of the things that we promised was a review of the Olympic legacy, because very clearly there's been a lot of investment. You go to places like Stratford and you can see it's like, I call it cold Dubai, Stratford. So you can see that there is a legacy, at least in terms of the buildings, but in terms of social cohesion and how communities have been able to progress, I think the legacy is a bit opaque. And so Susan Hall, it's a good friend of mine who's hopefully going to carry that commitment forward when she publishes her manifesto. And so, I think we need to look at the legacy of what's been gone before. And very quickly, Seb mentioned, you're the first to mention civil society. It was a bit embarrassing because when I was in Down Street, I was responsible for civil society as Seb No, so thank you for that. And so we did have tens of thousands of people who registered to volunteer. And we had huge challenges, firstly, around how we could deploy people and utilise the demand. And yes, folks like St John's Ambulance did a fantastic job, but there was so much demand and we couldn't deploy them quickly enough. And then also the challenge was then, how do you sustain that desire to do more? And so again, the state is not the answer, but the state can be an enabler, a convener, can offer some resource, etc. And I think we have to try and make sure we do a better job. And I think the challenge for all of us is manifestos being published next year. We need to try our best to get folks in Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, whatever, to commit to looking again at what went wrong in 2010 and what went right and how we can build on that, because we've definitely regressed.
I think, if I might, the questions about sport, the questions about youth, the theme that links them with volunteering. We have organisations from Sport England, Football Beyond Borders, the FA, they sit as part of the Together Coalition. Plenty of youth organisations do, plenty of faith organisations do. I think your point is a really valid one, because actually I think all of those things are just articulations of what community looks like. And I think it's perfectly natural from a volunteering point of view that some people will find their community in one way and some way with another, and you describe it as grassroots, but actually I worked in the volunteering sector for 10 years, and what the adage that I used to use that always stayed true is people would come for the cause but stay for the people. People would come for the sporting agenda, or they might step forward as a result of the Olympics, or they might come forward to kind of support vaccination. But if they're going to be still there weeks later, it's because they've made relationships, they've made connections. And to your point about learning about people, I think that's the finest way that you can go about that. And I saw that myself firsthand in the pandemic, where people from all backgrounds, people from all levels of skill came forward to do something that they really believed in. I think it's quite natural that you can awaken an interest in millions of people, and that will subside. People will not see the urgency of it. I'm not sure if government-mandated sport tournaments are the way to drive continued engagement with it, but I'm open to the idea, because like Samuel, I think there's a role for government in gently sponsoring things that provoke that interest. But it is the role of those groups and the supporting and the sustainment of those groups, so that it is that welcoming group of people that keeps that momentum alive, and that will keep all of the sport, youth and community sectors going.
I'm just conscious we didn't actually answer the question from the speaker in the previous round about young people. No. And this is and cohesion, because this is something that really vexes me. I think, again, from my time in education, one of the things we worried about particularly was white working class boys. And there have been lots of sort of discussion about it, and then very little that's been done. And now, should it be a surprise to us that if you look at polling, there's a significant chunk of young men who think Andrew Tate is a role model as a result. And that's just one example of lots of other groups who feel disenfranchised. But it's that disenfranchisement that I think unites the different groups. And I think it's why we have to work much harder at convincing young people they've got a stake in society as it is. The things which Samuel was talking about, what Tim was saying about housing, I think is absolutely vital to that, because unless we do, they're going to have much less faith in what liberal democracy has to offer them and start looking elsewhere.
Do we really know that lots of young men see Andrew Tate as a role model?
There was a YouGov poll this week, which was, and it shocked me. It was sort of, it would equate to hundreds of thousands of young men rather than.
Yeah,
out of tens of millions.
Out of tens of, but still, that's a significant.
Which is why you get in schools, they have to bring police in to break up a situation where somebody has been putting forward Andrew Tate policies, and that's caused dreadful problems with the girls in the class.
Slightly depressing end to the panel. I'll finish with one quick fire question for everyone on the panel.
There's somebody
We unfortunately don't have time. We're kind of getting.
I haven't answered that gentleman's question.
Shout it anyway.
Do we want to answer quickly your question, or
Just but we could talk about it perhaps another time.
Oh yeah,
I was involved in the Shaftesbury Housing Group. I don't know whether you know them, but they allocated, when they renovated or rebuilt a housing estate, they specifically built community capacity. They put aside locations in them, and they invested, I think it was 2% of their investment in the civil society group. So I think I'm with you, but a long topic for another time.
Yeah, unfortunately we're all very quickly running out of time, so I'm going to do 30 seconds to answer this question. But obviously we are thinking about manifestos very much at this CPC. One thing you would like to see Rishi put in his manifesto to help boost social cohesion? I'll start, Tim, at your end.
I've answered already. Council house building with extended family is the key criteria.
Samuel?
Always max housing, right?
Always housing. Luke?
Civics in schools.
David?
I like the sport idea actually. I mean, there is already a lot of organised national school sporting activity, but I think you're probably onto something. It could be more organised, and the kind of housing idea. I mean, communities are communities of places, of houses and flats, and although I'm with Tim in thinking that we are unfortunately the kind of world European leader anyway in family breakdown, and the weakness of our families lies behind a lot of our social policy problems. Nonetheless, there are kind of partly because families become so much weaker, we need alternatives to family, and that is often expressed through the kind of co-housing developments. I mean, obviously, most famously with older people, sort of sheltered housing. But what about younger people? Young women, say, who want to have babies but don't have reliable partners, who could be doing it together with other young women and support each other. I mean, those sorts of projects, I think, have a lot of potential, and hopefully they're happening already.
John,
I would define it, measure it, and target it the same way we do GDP. Let's understand it, let's measure it at a community level, and let's make it somebody's problem in government to see improvements in it.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's been a real privilege to chair this panel. I'd say it'd be great to be back at Bright Blue, but I've only been gone for a week, so it's not been much of a time apart. But to tell you more about Bright Blue, we have a absolutely packed programme this year. Tonight we've got a great our annual drink tank returns with Andy Strick and David Gork, so I encourage you to go to that. It's literally in half an hour, so run from here and go and grab some beers. But again, if you can please put your hands together for what has been a truly amazing panel.